Now, you may recall last year the Turnbull government decided to ban the Chinese company Huawei from any involvement in the rollout of the 5G network in Australia. Other countries are contemplating what to do on this front as well. They share, many of them, concerns about Huawei, and particularly with the technology of 5G, what sensitive information could be accessed. The US, of course, has also blacklisted Huawei on a trade front as well. Well, this week, Huawei's International Chief Security Officer, Andy Purdy, is in Australia. And not surprisingly, he argues Australia's got it wrong and it should reconsider this decision. Huawei has, in fact, commissioned its own research showing that it is possible to give it access to some parts of the 5G network without putting at risk the more sensitive core parts of the network. And I spoke to him a short while ago. Andy Purdy, thanks for your time this afternoon. Now, you argue Australia got it wrong in deciding to ban Huawei from the 5G rollout here. Why is that?
Well, we think the record has become clearer in the last year since Australia announced their decision. The decision was based on the view of the Australian government that the difference between the core network and the radio access network were going to blur as 5G rolled out. What's become increasingly clear, and you can see it in the testimony by the 4 UK carriers in the parliamentary hearing that occurred recently, that the distinction between the core network and the radio access network is a very important distinction, and there are a number of significant advantages for it. So that the primary reason cited by the Australian government is really no longer valid. So we hope there can be a reconsideration of the right of Huawei to participate in trying to bid on the network opportunity.
Well, this view that there's still going to be a clear distinction between the core part of the network and the less sensitive part of the network under 5G, this is based on research that Huawei commissioned itself, is that right?
Well, it's research that Huawei commissioned in the Ovum report that was just released, but you look at the testimony of the 4 UK carriers in the recent parliamentary hearing, they agree that the distinction between the core and the radio access is very important in terms of competition, in terms of security, in terms of the resiliency of the networks. So the primary basis that Australia depended on no longer appears to be valid.
Well, yes, those 4 carriers in the UK may hold that view, but clearly the Australian intelligence agencies and Australian Signals Directorate, as well as clearly some other countries, hold a very different view on this. So who are we to believe?
Well, the fact is that there are precautions that can be put in place, similar to the ones that allow Nokia and Ericsson to do business in the United States, despite the fact that they have deep connections to China. There can be mechanisms put in place to test the products and to monitor the activities of the networks and to strictly control the access that a vendor like Huawei has to being able to work on or fix the equipment, subject to permission from the customer and closely monitored with all keystrokes recorded. Those kind of mechanisms can address any real cybersecurity risk.
The difference, I suppose, between Nokia, Ericsson and Huawei is where the country is based and the laws in that country. As you know, the concern of Australia and other countries has been that China's counter-espionage and national intelligence laws state quite clearly that the Communist Party can compel Chinese companies to turn over information and open their systems to China's intelligence and security apparatus. Is that right?
Well, the legal opinions from 2 international law firms has been to the contrary, that there is no such law and it has no such operative effect. The mechanisms that can be put in place that allow Nokia and Ericsson to do business in the United States, they can be put in place to evaluate the products and make sure that there is no improper access to customer network or customer data, and to make sure that every keystroke is logged when specially configured laptops access the customer networks and customer data. Fully auditable, fully transparent. Those are the kind of mechanisms that can address real cybersecurity risk and provide assurance that there's not going to be improper influence from the China government or anyone else from outside Australia.
Sorry, to be clear on this, though, you're saying if the Chinese government demanded Huawei hand over intelligence or security information, it could say no?
What I'm saying is that there can be proven mechanisms put in place to guarantee that it's not possible for Huawei to turn over such information without it being known to the carriers and to the Australian government.
Okay, but this is an important point. It would still have to hand over that information.
No, what we're saying is that Huawei would not have the ability to access that information. And those protections can be put in place and those protections, that technology exists and the ability to provide oversight exists. So there can be assurances that there is no undue influence by the China government on Huawei in terms of how we do business in Australia or how we access.
Sure, but opinion differs on that point you're making about what access there would be to sensitive information on the network. But once the information is gathered, it would have to be handed over upon a request from the Chinese government, wouldn't it?
But the fact is there's a misunderstanding about how the telecom operators operate. They're not giving us carte blanche to access data. It's very controlled, very restricted, completely auditable, and only subject to the permission from the Australian carriers before we provide that access. And in fact, the Australian carriers could decide that Huawei, after the equipment is installed, is not going to provide the updates or repair the services. And if we are allowed to do it, it could be subject to the direct oversight by officials from the Australian carriers.
One of the other concerns has been the ownership structure of Huawei. Is Huawei effectively a state-owned, Chinese state-owned company?
No, there are state-owned companies. There are companies where the government of China owns a majority interest of publicly traded shares. Huawei is a privately owned company, and that we have over 90,000 of our employees who have ownership shares in the company, and we completely controlled by the private entity with no undue influence, no control from the China government.
So employees, I mean, you're a senior employee. Are you a part owner of Huawei as well?
Yes, I have an ownership share, and so we get our revenue distribution every May.
And you get to go to AGMs, the usual thing that shareholders do?
We do what?
You go to annual general meetings?
Oh, no, I don't, no.
But is that how the company works? You can buy shares as an employee and go along to annual general meetings?
I participate in the earnings distribution, so I have shares that I get, that I have a 5-year ownership under the laws of the United States, a time-based unit program, as in any privately owned company. Employees of Huawei in China have the opportunity to actually vote on the leadership of the company, and we think it's a very transparent process. It's one that's been audited by KPMG, the global auditor.
All right, Andy Purdy, the Chief Security Officer at Huawei. Appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.